They didn't just fire her. They dismantled her entire future, her career, her dignity, her trust, and handed it over to a woman who smiled while shaking her hand. And Lily Rose, she didn't cry. She didn't beg. She went home, opened her laptop, and started building the thing that would eventually bring their entire airline to its knees. This is not a story about revenge. It is a story about a woman who finally stopped shrinking herself to fit into rooms that were never designed for her. Lily Rose had always loved the sky. Not in the poetic way people say it when they want to sound dreamy. She loved it the way engineers love a perfectly solved equation. The sky to her was a system, a massive, invisible infrastructure of routes and altitudes, pressure zones and jet streams, thousands of invisible roads traveled by millions of people every single day. And she understood it better than almost anyone she had ever met. She had spent 11 years at Meridian Airways, 11 years of arriving early, staying late, solving problems that other people walked past without noticing. She had started as a junior operations coordinator fresh out of university, one of the youngest in her department, and had climbed, steadily and quietly, to become the head of strategic operations for the entire Eastern Division. She had restructured their ground handling contracts, saving the company over $40 million across 3 fiscal years. She had personally overhauled their crew scheduling system after a cascading delay crisis that had left thousands of passengers stranded during a holiday weekend. She had built relationships with airport authorities, government regulators, fuel suppliers, and maintenance crews across 14 cities. She knew every corner of how that airline breathed, and she loved it. Even on the bad days, the crisis calls at 2 a.m, the hours spent in freezing hangars reviewing technical logs, the weekends lost to budget reviews. She genuinely, deeply loved what she did. Her name was not on any billboard. The passengers who landed safely because of her decisions never knew she existed, and that had never bothered her, not once, because the work was enough. The quiet satisfaction of the system running smoothly was more than enough. What she had never anticipated was that her dedication would one day be used as a weapon against her. His name was Daniel Hargrove. He was the kind of man who walked into a room and immediately started calculating who was useful to him and who wasn't. Lily had noticed it the first time she met him, 3 years ago at a regional leadership summit. He had a sharp jaw, an easy smile, and the kind of confidence that either belonged to someone genuinely exceptional or someone who had simply never been told no. She had figured out fairly quickly that it was the latter. Daniel had been brought in as the new vice president of commercial operations, a role that sat adjacent to hers but carried more visibility, more glamour, more boardroom FaceTime. He was impressive on paper. MBA from a well-regarded school, a stint at a consulting firm, some years at a low-cost carrier in Europe. He could talk strategy beautifully. He could present data with a kind of theatrical flair that made senior leadership nod along like they were watching a performance. What he could not do was run anything. Lily had watched him for months. She watched him take credit for route optimization work that her team had spent 6 weeks building. She watched him stumble through a supplier negotiation that she had quietly coached him through the night before, feeding him the key numbers and leverage points over text messages he never once acknowledged. She watched him charm the executive committee while the actual machinery of the airline, the part that kept flights moving and passengers safe, was held together almost entirely by her and the people who reported to her. She had not said anything, not because she was afraid, but because she was patient. She believed in that solid, unshakable way she believed in systems, that the truth would eventually surface, that the numbers would speak for themselves, that merit, in the long run, could not be buried. She was wrong. She found out about the engagement the same way she found out about most things at Meridian. Not through an official announcement, but through the quiet, electric current of office gossip that traveled faster than any internal email chain. Daniel was engaged to Vanessa Cole. Vanessa was the daughter of Raymond Cole, who was not just the chairman of Meridian Airways, but also the single largest individual shareholder in the parent holding company. She was 29, elegant in that effortlessly curated way that came with a certain kind of upbringing, and she had recently joined the company in a newly created role, Director of Brand Experience, that nobody could quite define, but everyone understood. Lily had met Vanessa a handful of times. She was not unpleasant. She was perfectly polished, good with names, skilled at making people feel briefly noticed. But she had no operational background, no technical knowledge, and no particular interest in acquiring either. What she had was her father's last name, and now a fiancé who was climbing fast. Lily had absorbed the news and moved on. It had nothing to do with her, she had told herself. Workplace romances happened. Power marriages happened. The airline would still need to be run by people who actually knew how to run it. It has nothing to do with her. She had once again been wrong. The restructuring announcement came on a Thursday. Lily was in the middle of reviewing a critical maintenance audit report when her assistant forwarded her a calendar invite for an all-hands meeting at 3 o'clock. She had attended hundreds of these. She finished what she was doing, made a coffee, and walked into the large conference room on the 14th floor, without any particular sense of dread. Raymond Cole stood at the front of the room. He was in his late 60s, silver-haired, with the comfortable authority of a man who had never had to question his own right to be in any given space. Beside him stood Daniel, and beside Daniel stood a woman Lily did not immediately recognize. It took her a moment. The woman's name was Claire Weston. She had been brought in, Lily would later discover, through a quiet, off-the-books executive search that had bypassed the company's standard hiring protocol entirely. Claire had spent 4 years at a consultancy, 2 years at a regional airline that had since been acquired, and her most recent role had been as a senior manager, not director, not VP, senior manager, at a logistics firm with no aviation experience. She was also, Lily would discover through a mutual contact 2 weeks later, the younger sister of Vanessa Cole's closest friend. Raymond Cole spoke about evolution, about the company entering a new phase of growth, about the importance of fresh perspectives and dynamic leadership. He used words like agile and visionary and transformation. He spoke for approximately 12 minutes without saying anything concrete. And then Daniel stood up and explained, in smooth, practiced sentences, that Lily Rose's position, head of Strategic Operations Eastern Division, was being eliminated as part of a broader realignment. Her responsibilities would be redistributed across 2 newly created roles, and the individual stepping into the senior-most of those roles, responsible for overseeing integrated operations strategy, would be Claire Weston. Lily sat very still. She was aware of people glancing at her. She was aware of the particular quality of silence in the room, that careful, held-breath silence of people who were both embarrassed and relieved that it was not them. She kept her expression neutral. She kept her hands flat on the table in front of her. She did not say a single word. After the meeting, 2 people came to find her. Her assistant, Marcus, who looked genuinely stricken and said, "Lily, I'm so sorry, I had no idea." And her colleague and friend of 7 years, Priya, who took one look at her face and said quietly, "What are you going to do?" Lily had looked out the window at the tarmac below, where a plane was being pushed back from the gate, its engines beginning their low, building roar. "I'm going to go home," she said, "and then I'm going to think." She was given 4 weeks of notice, a standard severance package, and a handshake from Raymond Cole that lasted approximately 2 seconds. Daniel did not seek her out. Claire Weston sent her a brief, professionally worded email expressing how much she looked forward to learning from the transition documentation Lily would be handing over. Lily read the email twice. Then she opened a new document and began writing the most thorough, precise, and comprehensive operational handover she had ever produced. Every process, every vendor relationship, every regulatory contact, every system password, protocol reference, and institutional memory she had accumulated over 11 years. She worked on it for 3 weeks straight. And then, on her last day, she saved a copy for herself. Not out of malice, simply because she understood something that neither Daniel, nor Raymond Cole, nor Claire Weston had thought about. That information properly understood is not just a record. It is leverage. She didn't know yet what she would do with it, but she knew herself well enough to know that she would figure it out. The first 3 months after leaving Meridian were, by her own admission later, some of the hardest of her life. Not because she was idle, Lily Rose had never been idle. She consulted. She took on a short-term project with an airport authority working on terminal expansion. She ran a workshop on operational efficiency for a group of regional airline executives. She stayed busy, professionally speaking, in ways that would have looked perfectly respectable on any resume. But the thing about spending 11 years inside a system you genuinely loved is that leaving it doesn't just affect your calendar. It affects something deeper, the shape of your days, the thing you reach for when you wake up at 5 in the morning because a problem you were working on the day before has clarified itself overnight and you need to write it down before it disappears. That particular feeling, the urgency of something important to solve, had been the texture of her life for over a decade, and now it was just quiet. She called Priya every few days. She ran in the early mornings. She cooked elaborate meals that she hadn't had time to cook before. She read every industry report she had bookmarked over the years and never gotten around to. She was, by every external measure, fine. Inside, she was rebuilding. The idea did not arrive in a single moment. It grew, the way the best ideas tend to, from the slow accumulation of observations she had been making for years and had never had the space to act on. There was a gap in the market. She had seen it clearly during her time at Meridian and had raised it twice in strategic planning meetings where it had been acknowledged with polite nods and then never revisited. The gap was this: mid-sized airlines, particularly regional carriers operating in competitive hub markets, were hemorrhaging money on operational inefficiencies that were almost entirely preventable. Not because the problems were complex, but because the people tasked with solving them didn't understand the full system deeply enough to see where the bleeding was actually happening. What they needed was not a consultant who would produce a report and disappear. They needed something more like an embedded operational intelligence service, a team that understood aviation at the granular level, could integrate with existing systems, identify the specific pressure points, and implement targeted solutions that produced measurable results within a defined time frame. It was the kind of service Lily had essentially been providing to Meridian, informally, for years. She had just never named it or charged for it. She started writing the business plan on a Sunday evening in late October, sitting at her kitchen table with a cup of tea and the particular calm of someone who has finally figured out what they are supposed to be doing. She wrote until 2 in the morning. She went to sleep and woke up at 5 and wrote some more. 3 weeks later, she had a business plan, a financial model, a service framework, and a short list of 8 potential clients she had identified through her network. She had also done something she had never done before in her professional life. She had called in every favor she was owed. She had been generous with her knowledge and her time for 11 years. People remembered. People picked up the phone. The company she founded was called Airframe Solutions. Not glamorous, not designed to be. It was the name of something built to work, which was exactly the point. She brought on 2 people in the first month, a former colleague from her Meridian days named James, who had been quietly miserable in his current role and jumped at the chance to do something real, and a data analyst named Sophia, who was 26 and frighteningly good, and who Lily had met at an industry conference 6 months earlier and had stayed in contact with ever since. They worked out of Lily's apartment for the first 2 months. They ate a lot of takeout. They argued productively about methodology. They signed their first client, a small regional carrier in the Midwest, in February, 11 months after Lily's last day at Meridian. The contract was not large, but the work they did was exceptional. Within 90 days, they had identified 3 major inefficiency clusters in the client's turnaround operations, renegotiated 2 ground handling contracts, and restructured a fuel purchasing arrangement that had been quietly overpaying by a significant margin for years. The client's on-time performance improved by 14 percentage points. Their cost per seat mile dropped measurably. Word traveled the way aviation word always travels, through quiet conversations at industry events, through recommendations from airport authority contacts, through the particular respect that comes when someone solves a problem that everyone else said was unsolvable. By summer, Airframe Solutions had 3 clients. By autumn, they had 6. By the following spring, they had 15 full-time employees and had outgrown the apartment and the shared office space and moved into a proper suite in a building near the airport. Lily Rose was 38 years old. She had built something from nothing, and she had barely scratched the surface of what she intended to do. Intentionally. She had made a decision early on, in those first hard, quiet months, that she would not track what was happening there. Not because she didn't care, but because caring in that direction was a drain on energy that she needed elsewhere. She had poured 11 years into that company. She was not going to pour her attention into watching what they did with what she had left behind. But information has a way of finding people, whether they seek it out or not. It was Priya, who had left Meridian herself by then, and joined a regulatory consultancy, who called her on a Tuesday afternoon with the tone of someone who has something significant to say and is trying to figure out how to say it. "Have you been following what's happening over there?" she asked. Lily had paused. "No. You might want to." The operational situation at Meridian Airways had been deteriorating for over a year by the time Lily heard the first details. It had started, as these things often do, not with a single dramatic failure, but with a slow, compounding series of smaller ones. The kind of failures that look like isolated incidents when you're inside the system, and only reveal themselves as a pattern when you step back and look at the whole picture. Claire Weston, it turned out, did not understand the system she had been put in charge of. This was not entirely her fault. She had been placed in a role that required a depth of aviation operational knowledge that takes years, sometimes decades, to develop. And she had been given neither the time nor the support to develop it. What she had been given was a title, a salary, and a set of responsibilities that would have challenged even someone with twice her experience. Under her leadership, the operational handover documentation that Lily had prepared was treated as a reference document, rather than a living framework. Vendor relationships that had taken years to build were allowed to drift. Maintenance scheduling protocols that Lily had refined across multiple crisis iterations were quietly simplified in ways that introduced new failure points. The crew scheduling system, the one Lily had rebuilt after the holiday weekend disaster, was modified to accommodate new commercial routes without adequate testing, and began producing cascading conflicts within 6 months. The delays started first, then the cancellations, then the complaints. Daniel Hargrove, who had by now married Vanessa Cole in a ceremony that had apparently been featured in a regional lifestyle magazine, was insulated from the operational consequences by his commercial portfolio. He dealt in routes and partnerships and revenue projections, things that looked healthy on paper, even as the machinery below them ground and stuttered. Raymond Cole, informed by people who had learned not to bring him bad news, remained publicly confident about the airline's direction. But the regulator was paying attention. The Civil Aviation Authority had been watching Meridian's performance metrics for 3 consecutive quarters when they opened a formal compliance review. The trigger was a series of maintenance-related delays that, when examined together, suggested a pattern of procedural deviation from the safety management protocols the airline had committed to during its last certification review. Lily knew about this before it was public knowledge. One of her regulatory contacts, someone she had worked with closely during her Meridian years, called her not to share information, but to ask a question that told her everything she needed to know. If someone were trying to understand how Meridian's operations were actually being run right now, the contact said carefully, and they wanted to compare it to how they were being run 2 years ago, would there be documentation that could help with that comparison? Lily had sat with that question for a long moment. Yes, she had said, there would be. She did not leak anything. She was meticulous about that. She did not call anyone at the authority unsolicited. She did not share proprietary information. She did not do anything that could be construed as improper. What she did was make herself available. When the authority's review team reached out through proper channels, as they did 6 weeks later, she responded promptly and professionally. She provided the documentation she was legally entitled to share, including records from her own tenure that she had retained within the bounds of her employment agreement. She answered questions with the precision and clarity that had always been her defining professional quality. She did not editorialize. She did not express satisfaction. She described what she had built, how it had worked, and what the departure from those practices would likely produce in terms of measurable outcomes. The review team found her, by multiple accounts, to be one of the most useful witnesses they had spoken to. The formal findings were released on a Wednesday morning, and Lily heard about them the same way the rest of the industry did, through the news. The Civil Aviation Authority had issued Meridian Airways a compliance directive requiring immediate corrective action across 7 operational categories, with a 90-day timeline to demonstrate measurable improvement or face suspension of operating licenses on 11 of their highest traffic routes. It was not a fine, it was not a slap on the wrist. It was the aviation equivalent of a judge saying, "Fix this now, or we will ground you." The routes in question accounted for roughly 38% of Meridian's revenue. The airline stock dropped 11% within 2 hours of the announcement. Daniel Hargrove issued a statement expressing full confidence in the company's ability to meet the requirements. Raymond Cole made a brief public appearance in which he assured passengers that safety was and had always been the company's top priority. Neither of them mentioned how they planned to actually fix what was broken. Lily found out about the phone call before it happened. Priya had heard through a mutual contact that Meridian's board, apparently operating now with a bit more urgency than usual, had begun asking whether there were external operational consultancies that could be brought in to help with the compliance remediation. The kind of firm that understood aviation at the system level, had regulatory relationships, and could move fast. There were not many, the field was not large. Airframe Solutions was the name that came up. Lily was in the middle of a client call when her assistant sent a message saying that someone from Meridian's board had called and was requesting an introductory conversation at her earliest convenience. She finished her client call. She looked at the message for a few seconds. Then she told her assistant to schedule a call for the following morning. She did not sleep particularly well that night. From something harder to name, a kind of fullness, she would say later. The feeling of a story arriving at exactly the point it was always moving toward. The call was with a board member named Elliot Marsh, who had joined Meridian's board 18 months prior, and who, it was clear from the first 3 minutes of the conversation, had been deeply unhappy with the direction of the company's operations for some time. He was direct, he was specific about the problem, and he was, to his credit, entirely honest about how the situation had developed. "We made some decisions about leadership 2 years ago," he said, "that I believe, in retrospect, were not made on operational grounds." Lily said nothing. "We are now in a position where we have 90 days to demonstrate to the regulator that we can correct systemic deficiencies that are frankly the result of institutional knowledge that was lost during a transition period. I've been told by 3 separate people in this industry that if there's anyone who understands how Meridian's operations were built and how to rebuild them, it's you." Lily looked out her office window at the airport in the distance, where a plane was banking on approach, its landing lights catching the morning light. "What you're describing," she said, "is a complex engagement. It would require full access to current operational data. It would require cooperation from your existing operational team. And it would require an honest internal assessment of how decisions are currently being made and by whom." "I understand," Elliot said. "I would also need to know," she said, calmly and without heat, "that this engagement would be conducted entirely on a professional basis. Airframe Solutions works on behalf of our clients and our clients alone. We don't operate in environments where political considerations override operational ones." There was a pause on the line. "I think you'll find," Elliot said, "that the current political landscape at Meridian has changed considerably." It had. Daniel Hargrove, she would learn through the course of the engagement, had submitted his resignation from his VP role 1 week before her contract with Meridian was signed. The official explanation was a desire to pursue other opportunities. The actual explanation, which circulated quietly among those who paid attention, was that the board had made clear that his continued presence would complicate the remediation process with the regulator. Claire Weston had already left 3 months earlier, in circumstances that were never publicly explained, but that Lily understood the moment she began reviewing the operational files. Raymond Cole remained as chairman, but a new chief operating officer had been appointed, a woman named Dr. Patricia Ng, who had 22 years in aviation operations, no patience for theater, and who met Lily for the first time over coffee and said within 5 minutes, "Tell me everything." That was the beginning of something Lily had not expected, a genuine partnership. The remediation engagement lasted 8 months. They were 8 of the most intense months of Lily's professional life since the holiday weekend disaster at Meridian years before. The scale of what needed to be fixed was significant. Some of it was technical, scheduling systems, maintenance protocols, vendor contract structures. Some of it was human, rebuilding trust with regulatory contacts, reestablishing communication norms between departments that had siloed themselves into dysfunction, giving people permission to raise problems before they became crises. Lily was on site 3 days a week for the first 4 months. She brought in 4 of her best people. She presented progress reports to the board monthly and to the regulatory authority on a defined schedule. She did not soften findings. She did not protect anyone's ego. She called things what they were and proposed specific, measurable solutions. Meridian met the regulatory requirements with 11 days to spare. The authority issued a formal compliance confirmation. The stock recovered. Patricia Ng sent Lily a handwritten note that she kept on her desk for a long time afterward. Elliot Marsh called personally to say thank you in the particular way that people say thank you when they mean it. It was professionally one of the most satisfying things Lily Rose had ever done, not because of what it meant for her, but because a system that mattered, a system that moved thousands of people through the sky every day, was working properly again. And that, in the end, was the thing she had always cared about most. The article came out about 6 weeks after the engagement concluded. A journalist who covered the aviation industry had been following the Meridian story, the compliance crisis, the remediation, the recovery, and had reached out to Lily for comment. She had declined to be quoted extensively, as she always did, but she had agreed to a brief conversation off the record that helped the journalist understand the shape of the story. The piece ran with the headline, "The Quiet Operator Who Fixed an Airline's Crisis," from the outside. It did not name Daniel Hargrove. It did not name Claire Weston. It did not detail the circumstances of Lily's departure from Meridian. But it described with impressive accuracy the arc of what had happened. A company that had lost institutional knowledge through poor leadership decisions, had paid a serious regulatory price, and had recovered by bringing in the person who had built the original system. People in the industry read between the lines. That is how industries work. Lily was asked in a follow-up email from the journalist whether she had any feelings about the irony of the situation, being let go by a company and then being brought back to save it. She thought about it for a while, then she wrote back a single sentence. "I don't think of it as irony. I think of it as a system finding its equilibrium." Airframe Solutions, by the end of that year, had 31 full-time employees, contracts with 19 clients across 4 countries, and a reputation in the aviation operational consulting space that had been built entirely on the quality of the work and the trust of the people who had experienced it firsthand. Lily Rose had never placed an advertisement. She had never issued a press release. She had never attended a networking event for the purpose of collecting business cards. Every client they had came through the same channel. Someone who had worked with them told someone else, and that person called. She had moved the company into a new office on the 4th floor of a building that overlooked the airport. She had a window in her private office that framed the runway at an angle that meant she could watch planes take off and land while she worked. She had arranged this deliberately. She was still in that office, still watching, when she got a call that she had not expected, but in some quiet way had known might come. It was Priya. "Raymond Cole is stepping down," she said, "full retirement, and you're not going to believe who they're considering for the new chairman of Meridian Airways." She had not pursued it. She wants to be clear about that if you ever ask her. She did not campaign for it. She did not make calls on her own behalf. She did not angle or position or leverage. But when the executive search committee reached out, through proper, formal channels, with a process that was thorough and transparent and conducted by people who had no particular allegiance to anyone, she did not say no. She listened. She asked questions. She went through the process the same way she approached every problem, carefully, honestly, and with full attention. The vote was unanimous. Lily Rose was appointed chairman of the board of Meridian Airways on a Thursday afternoon in March. She was 41 years old. She was the first woman to hold the position in the company's history. She was also, as everyone in the industry understood without it needing to be said, the person who had built the operational foundation that the airline was still running on, and who had rebuilt it once when it had been allowed to fall apart. She gave a brief statement to the press. She thanked the board for their confidence. She thanked Patricia Ng, with whom she would now be working closely, for the partnership they had built during the remediation. She said something simple, about what she believed the company needed to focus on going forward. She did not mention what had happened 3 years earlier. She did not need to. The people who needed to understand, understood. On her first day in the formal role, she arrived at the Meridian headquarters building at 7:15 in the morning. She took the elevator to the 14th floor, the same floor where she had sat in that conference room and heard her position described as eliminated. She walked past the conference room without stopping. She went to the chairman's office at the end of the corridor, which had been prepared for her, and she set her laptop on the desk. On the wall opposite the desk, there was a large window. Through it, she could see the tarmac. A plane was being pushed back from the gate, moving slowly out into the morning light, its engines building from a whisper to a roar. She watched it. She watched it taxi and turn and gather speed, and then, with that particular grace that never gets ordinary, lift free of the ground and rise. She turned back to her laptop and opened it. There was work to do. There was always work to do, and that, she had come to understand, was not a burden. It was the whole point. She had never wanted to ground their airline. She had simply wanted to do her job well. The grounding, when it came, was the airline's own doing, the inevitable result of a system running without the knowledge it needed. And the recovery, when it came, was hers, not as punishment, not as vindication, simply as the natural consequence of someone who understood what she was doing, being given the space, finally, to do it. The sky had always been a system, and Lily Rose had always known how to make it work. So where in the world are you watching this from? And what time is it there? Drop it in the comments. I genuinely love knowing. If you were Lily Rose, would you have gone back to save the airline that let you go? Or would you have let it fall? If this story hit different for you, you already know what to do. Hit subscribe, because Lily Calm Stories drops new stories every week, and each one is built for the kind of quiet that makes you think. End question. If you were Lily Rose, would you have gone back to save the airline that let you go?